It's not a good look for me. It's okay. So, good morning. Welcome back to Reading Aloud with Elliot Duhan. That's me. Oh, look, here's a $10 bill. Where'd that come from? It's funny. Um, Today we continue with Albrecht, Drue, Ghost Puncher by Paul D. Miller. Not that Paul D. Miller, but the other Paul D. Miller. And I'm going to read probably half a chapter this morning because I've got to go do some stuff. But just trying to think of how long I should go. I'm just going to start to read, and if I can get through this chapter, I will. It's a longish chapter, and to bring you up to date, Al, the main character, protagonist, drunk antagonist, is going down to the Cyclops, the Clops, his regular local bar, to meet his attorney, whose name I cannot recall, but you'll know in a minute. And the attorney delivers him a quarterly check from the annuity from the settlement that he received a couple of years back when he got run over by a truck, and it's what he lives on. But there's something nefarious going on, and you'll figure out what it is when we get to it. Okay, Chapter 3, Cyclops, Check Day. Al fucking loved the Cyclops. Time and booze had significantly diminished his capacity for loving anything. But if there was one thing that wasn't nachos that Al could say he loved with all his heart, it was the Clops. Just around the corner from one of those for-profit art schools that occasionally churned down a graduate with marketable job skills, and adjacent to a high-rise that charged a couple of grand a month for a studio apartment, the Cyclops drew a mixed crowd that reminded Al why he loved being alive. Art school girls showed up after the daytime classes or before the nighttime ones, and the eclectic crew of bitburgers who preferred to live and work in the city center commingled with them to create a nifty cocktail of lively conversation and potential face punchings. Even the bar's sign, just the word Cyclops spelled out in lowercase Courier new text, spoke to its understated, elevated vibe. No one would see the sign from the street and say, this looks like a fun spot, but anyone who knew enough to look for it was probably cool enough to be there. Of course, probably is a fairly pointed word, but that's a story for a few paragraphs down. The building itself was older than most in the city, dating back to when Bitburg hadn't quite existed yet, and the ancient stones held the resonating energy of all the generations that had passed, while they just sat there being rocks. The basement was connected to the warren of Shanghai and transit tunnels that ran under Bitburg like a waffle fry buried in a mound of Chilean cheese. The place had always been a bar or a public house or a speakeasy, and had seen a chair of atrocious and illuminating moments. I'm sorry, it's early. All those things, Al could feel them every time he walked through the front door or stumbled out the back, and every time he came in, one of his heroes was there to greet him, Malcolm X, smiling ear to ear, his mosaic portrait 10 feet tall, made out of those little plastic things that held bread bags closed, each one colored by hand, by some long-dead heroin addict. Always there were familiar faces and always new ones, and it filled Al with the kind of warmth usually invoked by whiskey or a good plate of all the nachos. When he first looked each new acquaintance in the eye, he'd never admit it, solitary dignitary that he was, but the reason Al loved the Cyclops so much was that it felt more like home than his shithole did. What makes a home? The people in it. Even the regulars had grown on him after a while, whether or not they knew or liked it. Take, for instance, the ghost geeks who had just now followed him through the front door. Whenever they called themselves, they fit right in with the rest of the motleys whose butts warmed the stools. He wasn't so sure about the three bros huddled around the brewskis in the back corner, but Al liked even seeing them here. It never hurts. It never hurt to have another face to punch. Then there was Charlene. What the hell could he do but be truly, madly, deeply, movie title quotingly in love with a girl who wore Jethro Tull t-shirts in 20-something without even a touch of irony? And it showed her dedication. She was not drinking excrement with her pink, steamed hands. She had those eyes, one was green, the other was blue, but you really had to look into them to notice it. And you got that close, you knew, in that moment. She knew you in ways you never could. That, and she had the most epic tits God ever put on a human. Saw fit to put on a human. When she wore her hair back, one long blue lock would fall to the left side of her face, and she'd spend half the night brushing it behind her ear, inevitably getting it tangled in one of the 8 rings she wore from the lobe to the little stiff bit that covered the ear hole. Then there was that way she could. Oh, God. Oh, good, you're here, Ari said, bumping into Al as he stood there blocking the door and gawking, the object of some requited love. Let's grab a seat, shall we? Serious business, then. Al, forcing himself to stop staring and follow Ari Jimenez to the closest table. Al hated sitting at tables in a bar. What the fuck was a bar for, if not for sitting If not for sitting and meeting new people, tables were too closed off, too private, too lacking an opportunity for unplanned misadventure. Still, oh, Ari had Ari had Al's check, and check day wouldn't be check day without the check. Serious business indeed, said Ari, wiping crumbs and probably not too small an amount of unavoidable feces from the chair before seating himself. Al swore Ari's back never flexed. His posture was as rigid as a hard-on in a whorehouse. A lucky strike found its way to Al's lips, somewhere between his standing and sitting, but he didn't light it, citing deference to his associate. Ari Shlomo Jimenez wore less scrutable than his usually normal inscrutable accountant expression. It's important to note here that Ari Jimenez was not a stereotypical Jewish accountant. In fact, he wasn't stereotypical Jewish anything. He was just the son of Honduras immigrants who happened to be racist as fuck and decided upon arrival of their firstborn they wanted a son who could grow into a man with a good job, who'd make them money and proud. And what better way to do that, making money parents to make your parents proud and rich, than to be a Jewish doctor or lawyer? So, being unintentionally and unmaliciously racist as they were, they named him Ari Shlomo Jimenez and sent him off into the world to make with the pride and the dollars. Ari had rebelled by refusing to become a doctor or lawyer, but he could not escape his uncommon facility with numbers and their manipulation, such as his racist parents. As such, his racist parents had to settle for the fact that Ari Shlomo Jimenez, CPA, was one of the most sought-after money guys in the city. Just who was seeking him Ugh, just who was seeking him remained mostly confidential. What with Ari's Achillean weakness for strippers, gambling, and most other vices, but such details don't keep his parents from bragging about their big shot Jewish accountant son. In fact, Mr. and Mrs. Jimenez bragging about Ari that had brought Al to him in the first place, much less their less palatable common acquaintances, not coming to light until later. Ari, your expression does not say, here's your thousands favorite client of mine, Al said. Usually Ari looked like a slightly stuffy, impeccably tanned young professional, the kind of guy you have no problem trusting with everything you own, and your sister, if you liked her. However, right now Ari looked more like the Ari Jimenez reluctant bringer of news that your old dog ate your new puppy, then choked on the bones and died right after shitting on your heirloom white shag rug, than Ari bringer of checks. This discrepancy wasn't lost on Al, who got the feeling he only usually got when he thought about what might be hiding in his mailbox. He looked over to Charlene for visual reassurance and to order booze, only to find his eyes staring straight into someone's crotch. The crotch in question belonged to Lilith, who wore in its cranberry leather tights exquisitely and gave off just a whiff of perfume from behind a low-slung half-apron. Hey, Albrecht, Lilith said, not through her crotch, but from a normal place words come out of a speaking person. Lilith said wrecked like wrecked, and she was about the only person who could get away with calling Al that. Charlene could have, but wouldn't call him anything except Al under most circumstances. Lilith had painted her lips thick and black tonight, and had taken great pains to give herself the perfect red ebony smoky eye treatment. Her rainbow in the dark hair would have made Ronnie James Dio proud, but what she'd spent on it in the afternoon at the Pesh Salon could easily be made up on a Friday night. How she managed to make it through a shift without a single strand ever coming undone was something that defied both physics and Al's ability to comprehend the universe. But he had to admit it looked damn good. Throw in the corset and the fishnet sleeves, and she made the cover of any vampire fantasies cosplayer's hot rod calendar. She was fucking hot for the vintage '90s anyway, and the way she brushed that ass up against Al reiterated her standing invitation. Thing is, she wasn't Charlene. She gave Al's companion a tip, in tip increasing wig. Hey, Ari. Ari didn't give two square shits that Lilith wasn't Charlene. He'd already grown mildly uncomfortable with the tailoring of his slacks because of her, and he hoped he wouldn't begin to sweat through them as well. Hiya, Lil, he said, making sure he kept his eyes on hers instead of strategically exhibited the parts that he really wanted to see. Let me guess, Lilith said, scrunching up her nose and nibbling on the veteran end of a red pen. Ari couldn't help but squirm and wish he'd been born a pen. Al just smiled at the girl and wondered why he never said yes when she asked him upstairs after he walked her home. For our regular double fighting cock, neat, and you are a Diet Coke with lemon. Sounds right to me, darling, Al said. Lilith didn't know if it was cheesy or charming, but she liked it when that wreck called her darling. She slipped the pen into her apron and twirled, making sure everybody in the steadily crowding bar got a good look. After all, she'd spent hours getting ready for the shift, and Brecht wasn't the only one she wanted to impress. Actually, Ari said, stopping Lilith mid-twirl, scratch the Diet Coke and bring me a tequila with a Guinness back. Al didn't startle easily, but this caught him off guard. Lilith just nodded and darted off, leaving both men with a stunning view of her sweet leather-wrapped ass. Not your normal check day libation, Ari. Al said, sliding low in his chair and raising an eyebrow in what he hoped was a pointedly interrogative expression. He hadn't even seen Ari drink anything boozified. And the last time he'd seen anyone drink tequila and Guinness, well, such things are better left for prequels. Something up? Acutely aware that Al had abandoned his sightseeing earlier than necessary and turned his focus toward his own less than scrutable visage, Ari slowly removed his Trotsky glasses, rubbed the lenses with the cloth he produced from his inside jacket pocket. Ari knew Al well enough that any real news, in order to be fully processed and retained by his client, would have to be couched with dramatic gestures and all requisite theatricality. So while Al danced his mercifully unlit cigarette across his knotty knuckles, Ari made a show of cleaning his glasses before replacing them and boring a tunnel through Al's captive gaze. Up indeed, Ari said. He must have achieved the appropriate saturation of gravitas because Lilith didn't even peep as she placed the drinks in front of them. Maybe he'd over-gravitastified, but that turned Lilith on. Nothing else had worked so far. Maybe that turned Lilith on, because nothing else had worked so far. Ari drained his tequila in one quick go, turned the glass upside down on the table. What's up is your annuity, in case you weren't keeping track. As in, it's up, replenished, deplenished, tap the crap out. Ari sipped his Guinness, the low-alcohol bread water instantly gelling with the Mexican napalm he'd just thrown down. It was true Al had never seen Ari drink, but it didn't mean he didn't know how. With his peculiar clientele, such displays of machismo were more frequently necessary than not. Guinness had served him well in many a vodka-soaked Russian warehouse, like milk chasing the heat from a batch of hot wings, but people assumed that Porter Stout meant hardcore instead of keep the Porters energized, hydrated, and sober, in an era when water was toxic, and Ari had no problem using others' ignorance to his advantage. Times like this, when Ari had to lie through his teeth, it helped to have some stage business. He didn't like having to put one over on one of the few people who he considered a friend, but Al had to buy into the whole thing, whole hog. If he didn't, it was Ari who'd be well and truly fucked, and Al's friend or not, Ari did not want to be the one who was getting fucked. Besides, to look at Al was to look at a guy who'd be dead in a week or a year anyway. How he'd failed to succumb to booze or bullets by now was a goddamn miracle on its own. Ain't that a shot to the nuts, Al said, succeeding in looking far less terrified than he suddenly felt. Wasn't that annuity supposed to last, like, forever? So no check? Ari tried to read The Big Drunk. He might as well have been reading his sister's kids' letters to Santa. Every year he got one of each of them, written in pictograms and chicken scratch. And because his sister rarely had more than a bong's load of cash to her name, he answered each as best he could. Because it wasn't his fault that their racist parents had completely ignored her. Finally, he closed the book of Al, reached into his pocket, and withdrew a small white envelope. "This is the last one, Mr. Drue," Ari said. He laid the envelope in front of Al and placed a fine-looking engraved silver pen beside it. He sipped his Guinness. He already shot tequila. "Thanks fucking Christmas. As long as he wasn't flat broke, 4 months from now Al could deal with this happy horseshit. Hell, if he was lucky, he'd be dead by then and not have to worry about it." Al snortled, eyeing the envelope, left hand absent-mindedly coiling around his drink. "Well then, here's to not being completely and utterly fucked," Al said, and threw 4 ounces of 6-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey down his throat. Fighting cock was something like 103 proof, but smoother than Midnight Al thought he was. Still, there was a bit of a burn underneath, and that was enough to wrinkle his belly. Another few glasses, and it would wrinkle his mood. A few more, he'd wrinkle somebody else's. The whole place would end up in an upturned laundry hamper that no amount of regret could ever iron out. Al could see that scenario laid out in front of him like a $10 whore, and for an instant his grin became a sneer. Like the man said, "Whiskey, it angries up the blood." Bonus question. Who said that? Who said whiskey angries up the blood? Okay. Leave it in the comments and I'll give you a present. Ari watched Al's face. He caught the sneer even if nobody else would have. As he understood it, that sneer was a rare but regular visitor to these parts and never preceded good things. That's why Ari and Al were associates instead of friends. Yet, Ari didn't have many friends or even many associates who weren't wanted by law or wanted to throw him out a window, so he couldn't help himself from letting out a sad little sigh. This was the part of the plan that maybe made it okay for Ari to run a con on the guy who had more than once willingly bailed him out of the kind of shit he was unwillingly bailing out of right now. The sign was a prelude. This part of the cell. Al saw Ari's posture droop down the littlest bit and tried to look perkier. For his part, Ari raised his glass, tilted it toward his client of the last 8 years, and said, "To not being completely fucked," and mostly drained the beer. "Neato," Al said, and then turned his magic waitress hailing eyes to the crowd in search of Lilith and more booze. He thought briefly about heading back to the bar to flirt with Charlene, but his disappointment to alcohol ratio had already leaned too far to the former. Lilith must have felt his eyes on him, because she straightened up from the black-clad bros table where she'd been selling another round of brewskis with the spillage from her corset and winked at him. Al didn't like the way the guy with the faux hawk leered at Lilith's ass while her attention was diverted, and disliked how the three of them high-fived and hyena laughed when she'd flitted away altogether. He was kind of hoping they were gone by the time he'd finished a bottle of the cock. And again, maybe he kind of didn't. Really, Al, Ari said, watching him, watch them, watch her. This was the part where if he squinted real hard, Ari could look back and say the con had been just about as much getting Al out of his bullshit situation and making him do something with his life as it had about getting Constantine off his own back. Have you given any thought to what you're going to do for money now? Truth be told, Al had pointedly and adeptly ignored that question since it began one. He knew he needed to figure out what to do with the rest of his life, but fuck all that. And fuck Ari for asking personal questions. Whatever the fuck I do, at least I already got a card for it. I'm thinking I might become a gigolo, Al said. Ari rarely called him Al. More theatrically, he supposed. He always did this when he wanted Al to pay attention. Maybe it's a straight man whore. Al, Ari said, emphasizing the familiarity, even if he did make it professionally uncomfortable. After all, Once Al signed the contract inside the envelope, there'd be no accountant-client relationship. So I might as well get used to calling him by his first name. This is pretty serious. I don't know how you're going to manage to live I don't know how you've managed to live as long as you've got on as long as you have on what you've got, but that's gone now. How are we going to live? Al did his best alone, which was fairly weak, day by day. Surprising everybody, himself included, Ari slammed his open palm against the table. Damn it, Al. Once you sign the contract, your income goes from pitiful to non-existent. And painful. Pitiful I could at least turn into a livable. Non-existent stays at it, not a damn cent regardless of my supernatural talent for money-making. Legally, I won't even be able to accept to collect call from you, let alone handle every aspect of anything remotely resembling your business affairs. You understand that, right? Al decided he didn't particularly like this version of R.A. Shlomo Jimenez, certified public asshole. Well, maybe if you'd handled him better. Do not blame me for that, R.A. said, regaining his composure and adopting a quiet, severe manner that reminded Al of a mailbox snake, who even now was probably slithering all over his unmentionables. I'm not the one who got drunk and let your sole credit card loose on Kickstarter. For fuck's sake. A fan-funded Firefly reunion? Are you serious? He couldn't help himself. Just the thought of such a miracle split Al's face from one dimple to another. It wasn't enough to make his teeth show, but it was plenty to set Ari back to fuming. Luckily, Lilith's immaculate self showed up with another round. She spared none of her cleavage on the table just because they were friends. She figured she only had few years left of equity left in her girls. She was going to get every dollar out of them while she still could. Not quite used to booze and Lilith's boobs at the same time, Ari had lost track of his thoughts for exactly as long as it took Al to remember that this was a friend, not some faux hawk-wearing bro. Ari hadn't quite earned a face punching, at least not yet. Look, Ari, Al said, tucking his lucky behind his ear. He sat up straight, leaned forward, wiping the bullshit off his face. He took a cue from his own accountant, played up his own gravitas. I know you don't understand me, but I do understand a few things, like the universal locomotive. Wait a sec. Han, wait a sec, Lilith said, holding a finger in front of Al's face, and thereby completely derailing him, his universal locomotive. Her hand spirited in and out of her apron. Before he could squee, he started dabbling a clean napkin on Ari's chest. Somewhere along the line, he managed to spill the dregs of his Guinness all over himself. She smiled right at him. She said, no wonder you usually stick with Diet Coke. Lilith finished her dabbing and gathered up the empty glasses. When she left, the smile she dropped in Ari's lap. Was the kind that POWs think about to get them through the years of rat bites and bamboo splinters under the fingernails. Al waited for Ari's intoxication to almost wear off before he got back on his train. Ari was so blissfully unsettled that he just sat there looking, thinking, and mentally doing cost-benefit analysis of ruined shirts to being touched by Lilith. See, the universe is a locomotive. You get on, it takes you where it takes you, and ticket runs, you get off. You get the hell off. What? Ari said. Al's being Alness cutting through the lingering warmth of Lilith's touch. Al was chugging on down the track now, pleased as punch and just about as full of alcohol. He leaned back to take a drink and make sure anyone within earshot could hear him. To his ultimate satisfaction, Charlene had moved down to the end of the bar now that the Klops was reaching capacity, and looked to be taking her own sweet time cleaning a glass with what he assumed was unsafely hot water. As soon as they made eye contact, Charlene rolled hers and stuck her tongue out. Al wouldn't have expected any less. You only get one place to get on and one place to get off, and as long as you stay on the train, you're always right where you're supposed to be. Again, Ari said. Lilith was leaning over somebody else's table now, giggling. The warmth she'd left had faded. What? Hey man, I'm on my train. If mine is the next stop, I'll get off. If not, I'll keep riding. Keep watching scenery, drinking my flask, and smoking in the bathroom with the fan turned on. Al sat back, arms crossed in triumph. Through the sudden onset bourbon buzz and the successful employment of the metaphor in the social situation, 7 points in the bullshitter's game of life, if you're keeping score, the discontent of Ari's fiscal revelation had all but erased itself from his mind. A few tables away, Lilith had her hand on some old guy's shoulder. That's probably how she thought about it. How she thought about Ari, if she thought about him at all. Some customer, just some customer. Ari gave his drinks the once over. He looked up at Al, made him feel sick, and Al's refusal to acknowledge even the weight of what was happening made his sickness even sharper. This is some seriously boneheaded bullshit, Ari said. Tell me this, Al. Were you on the train when you, after your first pro fight, the fight you lost, by the way, you got drunk and walked in front of a goddamn truck? That was a low blow, especially from Ari. Well, it did happen to be a Coca-Cola truck, and the ensuing settlement has supported me for the last 8 years, as you kind of fucking well know. So yeah, I guess I was. Al thought about that, chuckled, and scowled at the same time. Also, I didn't get drunk. I was already fucking shithoused when I stepped into the ring that night. Ari sighed, again, rubbing his temples with one hand until the other was free to signal surrender. He knew Al well enough to know that he was beyond reach, and likely would be, until the bender that started tonight worked its way through to its end. Left him curled up in the corner of the shithole apartment that he would soon be unable to afford. Besides, he didn't know him well enough to admit that he cared much, at least not well enough to abort his mission to trick the guy into signing over his only source of income, the guy he trusted to make sure his life maintained a level of normal comfort for the remainder of his long, slow suicide he'd stumbled into. Lilith was flirting with another table now. He needed to go change his shirt before the meeting with Konstantinov. No scene in stretching shirts. No, no sense in stretching this out any longer. Stretching shirts. Ari pushed the envelope in. Damn it, where was the pen? Oblivious to Ari's sudden shift from exasperated grown-up to spastic first grader, Al went through the envelope. His check was there, bigger than usual, along with a sheet for him to sign, signifying the successful completion of his association with the accounting and law firm of Coleridge and Ditko. He assumed that's what it was anyway. Oh, sorry. Readings for pussies and menus. Damn it. Al used his own pen. The way he saw it, his man pens like his penis, otherwise it wouldn't be spelled that way. To sign with a capital A and a lowercase Drue, and passed the paper back to his former accountant. Ari looked totally shaken. He knew he'd put the damn pen his father had passed down to him on the table with the envelope, hadn't he? He'd had the thing for almost 30 years. It wasn't just an heirloom, it was his lucky pen. But he couldn't panic. He breathed again. If it wasn't on the table, that meant he hadn't brought it with him into the bar. If he hadn't brought it into the bar, he couldn't have lost it, right? And Al was handing him the papers. Ari Shlomo Jimenez, CPA, composed himself because that was the professional thing to do. I'm going to read that sentence again. It's a nice sentence. If it wasn't on the table, that meant he hadn't brought it with him into the bar. If he hadn't brought it with him, he couldn't lose it. Right now, Al was handing him the paper. Ari Shlomo Jimenez composed himself because that was the professional thing to do. Still a good sentence. You know, Al said, Ari, giving him a tenth of his attention as he satisfied himself that everything was in order. I'm thinking I might become a private eye. I mean, I drink hard, I quip, I could totally pull it off. All I need is a trench coat, a hip flask, and a shoulder holster to carry my two best friends, and I could be like the scourge of the underworld, or at least I could take pictures of guys cheating on their wives. Ari folded the paper, shook his head, and looked Al straight in the eyes. It was kind of sad the way the guy had no idea he just signed away the rest of his life savings, the rest of his shitty life. He didn't have a clue about the magnitude of what was going to happen to him as soon as the last check ran dry. And even with the fiduciary alchemy, Ari had executed to squeeze as much as possible out of the last quarter's dividends. It wouldn't last more than a few months. Al didn't have anywhere to go or anyone in the world to take him in. And the worst part was he didn't even seem to care. One, Ari said, standing and pushing his chair down under the table. You hate guns. Second, you don't own a camera. 3, you have the detective skills of a slow-witted alpaca. Al laughed, hard and real. Tell me what you really think, dude. Ari tucked the power of attorney transfer into his jacket, along with any regret he may have felt. Sure, Al might die when the money ran out, but Ari wouldn't live through the night if he didn't render unto Konstantinov what was Konstantinov's. There's enough in that check to make it work for you. I don't know exactly what you're good at, but I'm sure there's a school for it or something. Use it, Al. Just fucking monetize your aptitudes or something. Just because you can't make a living punching people anymore doesn't mean you have to give up on life. The accountant put forth a hand to his former client to shake, but Al was having none of it. Instead, he sprang out of the chair, gave Al the biggest man hug he had ever gotten, and after a less than comfortable embrace, finally pulled back, holding him like his eyes were snapping a Polaroid. "It's been good to know you, man," Al said, his smile so laden with honest affection Ari couldn't help but let some of it overflow into his own. Hell, maybe Al would be okay. He'd made it this far, through luck, charm, and beating the hell out of people, so maybe he'd just keep chugging along in that stupid-ass universal locomotive of his. Independently lower-class Ari. That's all I need to be, right, Al? Ari said and left the bar. He still had to get back to the office and change his shirt and, for that matter, retrieve his pen from where, if he hadn't brought it with him, it had to be safely locked in his desk. Al watched him go. At long last, he lit the lucky strike he'd stashed behind his ear, opening, striking, and closing the Zippo in a flashy manner that back in the day had many times broken the ice between him and some eventually regretful young lady. Art probably had a point somewhere in all his stern-faced naysaying. Al could, he supposed, go home, dry out, and look at using the last bit of this money he'd gotten. He'd trade for his life and career to maybe try and start a new one. Yep, if RA had a point, that would be it. But fuck points. All the things that make you bleed have points, and Al had always preferred hammers, or at least getting hammered. Fuck, they couldn't all be gold, but the internal wordplay was enough of an excuse for Al to keep smiling, as he could have hoped for. That's chapter 4 of the Albrecht Drue Ghost Puncher. And I'm going to go about my business for the day, and I hope to see you later on here on Reading Aloud from Roxy Young.